So in the last two lectures, what you have seen is DNA and RNA, right? So this course is called Science of Living System, right? So what we are studying is living system, basically systems like you and me, bacteria, virus, okay, any system that is living. Now there can be debate about virus, but it is sometimes living, sometimes non-living. So we'll come to that maybe towards the end of this course. So what we are doing in the initial part of this course is we are looking at molecules which give rise to these fantastic living systems. Okay, and if you think about all the molecules, these three are most probably the most important molecules which are connected in this elegant manner, which is called the central dogma of molecular biology. Right? So it turns out that these three molecules, DNA, RNA, and protein, these are present in all life forms, whether it is virus or it is us. Right? And these three molecules carry out almost all the important functions among themselves. So DNA is the one that has been entrusted with keeping information. So DNA molecules, these are the molecules which store information. And proteins, these are the nanomachines. They are the ones which carry out all the functions. Okay, anything that happens in your body is being carried out by some protein. RNA is the intermediate between these two, and we will see a lot about RNA. So you have seen a lot about RNA in the last lecture when we talked about transcription, and you will also see some bit of that in today's lecture also. So all these three molecules are polymers. Okay, so these are linear polymers. So whenever you are making a linear polymer, you need a monomer, where this monomer will have two functional groups, just like two hands. Okay, and then one hand will hold one person, the other hand will hold another person, and that way you can form a linear chain. Okay, so if everyone in the class does that, we will make a human chain. In this case, all the monomers make a polymer. So these monomers are nucleotides in case of DNA and RNA, and the monomers in case of proteins are called amino acids. So these are all linear polymers. There is no branching. Okay, even though in case of proteins we will see that there are third functional groups, but you will not get any branching from those third functional groups. Okay. So how do you make these polymers? This is the basic structure of an amino acid. Let me actually skip a few slides and show you that slide first. Okay. So can someone confirm if you can see this slide? Amino acids, building blocks of proteins.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So this is the basic structure of the monomer, that is amino acid, which is the building block or monomer of proteins. Okay. So you have a carbon, and carbon, it's a sp3 hybridized carbon, so it has four hands. One carries the amino group, other one carries the carboxylic group, that's why it's an amino acid. Third one has a hydrogen, and the fourth one has an R group. Okay, it can be an alkyl group, it can be an aromatic group. So this is the one that is variable. Everything else is the same. So we know that if it's a sp3 hybridized carbon, then it will have a tetrahedral geometry, right? Now this is where the variation comes in. So we'll come to that in a minute. Let us first see how the polymer is formed. Okay, so again I told you that there are two functional groups. One is the amine group, the other one is the carboxylic group. So this carboxylic group of one amino acid and the amine group of the other amino acid, they will react. So you will get release of water molecule. So H from here and OH from here. So that's a condensation reaction, right? So water molecule goes out, you get this amide bond. But in this case, we give it a special name. We call it a peptide bond. Okay. So normally CONH, that's an amide bond in basic chemistry, but here we call it a peptide bond. and you get release of water molecule. Now this is a dipeptide. Okay, it has 2 amino acids linked to it. It is a dipeptide. You see it has a free carboxylic group. So another amino acid can come, a third one can come, and it can react and it can form another peptide bond and keep on increasing in this particular direction. So the first amino acid, this amine group will remain free, and whichever will be the last amino acid, its carboxylic group will remain the free. So that is why when you have this polymer, which is a protein or a peptide, this is called the N terminus, which will have the free amine group, and this is called the C terminus, which will have a free carboxylic group. Okay, just like your DNA and RNA, we give two names to the two ends. One is the 5' end, the other one is the 3' end. Okay, similarly in case of proteins, this is the N terminus, N for amino group, and this is the C terminus, C for the carboxylic group. So you can keep on increasing. Here I have shown only 5 or 6. It can be 100 or 1000. So proteins, these polymers can be really, really long. Okay, the average size of proteins in our body is 500 amino acids, but that's the average size. There are proteins which are very small, maybe around 50 amino acids, and then there are proteins which have thousands of amino acids. So how do this form? You have already seen these processes. So we have seen that when DNA replicates, that is called replication, there is a machinery that is involved. It is called DNA polymerase, right? Now DNA, it's a very long molecule. If you think about the DNA in our body, that will be 3 billion base pair long. So each of this is a base pair, right? So that's 3 billion base pair long. So if you take the whole DNA, just extract DNA from one of your cells, stretch it out, that will be almost 2 meters long. Okay, taller than anyone in this class. Part of that DNA gets copied into messenger RNA. So that part is called transcription, and another machinery is involved there, which is called RNA polymerase. Right? And then finally, this information is used to synthesize proteins. Okay, I have not told you one thing so far, but let me tell you that. So in case of DNA, there are 4 monomers. In case of RNA, there are 4 monomers. But in case of proteins, it turns out that there are 20 monomers. Okay. So you need again some machinery that will translate this information into this type of information, right? So basically you are changing the language. You are going from a language which has only 4 alphabets into a language which has 20 alphabets, right? So that is why this step is called translation. And you need a machinery that will do this translation. So what you will see is that this, as we go from here to here, the process becomes more and more complex. That is why the machinery is also more and more complex. In case of DNA, it was just one protein, which is the DNA polymerase. For transcription, it was a multimeric protein. So sigma factor comes in, then other alpha and beta subunits come in, right? So it was a bit more complex process. In case of translation, you will see that the process is even more complex. So let's look at that. So for translation, you have to start with a messenger RNA. Okay. So if this is a eukaryotic system, what do you have at this end? And what do you have at this end? So there is a difference between the eukaryotic RNA and prokaryotic RNA, right? So prokaryotic is bacterial RNA. And eukaryotic is the RNA that we have. So we are eukaryotes. Most multicellular organisms are actually, all multicellular organisms are eukaryotes. So no one knows the difference?
Sir, in eukaryotes, the 5'
sorry,
so
the eukaryotes?
So the 5' end of the mRNA has G cap and 3 prime end has a long poly tail.
Long poly A tail. But these things are absent in bacterial messenger RNA, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So, which means that there is a basic difference between the two types of messenger RNA. Okay. And even though the machinery that will do this translation is the same or similar, but there are fundamental differences between the two. Okay. And in the next few slides, we will see that that actually is very important. Because this machinery, it has this name called ribosome. The way they recognize the messenger RNA and the way they know where to bind and where to start, okay, this is slightly different. And it turns out that this is little smaller in case of bacteria and much bigger in case of us. So that this is a very attractive target for antibiotics. So what are antibiotics? Can anyone tell what is an antibiotic? I'm sure you must have heard the name antibiotic, right? Because, huh?
The chemicals which are used to like damage bacterial cells. Like either they would like stop their growth or they would completely.
Yes, so they kill bacteria, correct. So have you taken any antibiotic in your life?
Yes, sir.
Yes, all of you have taken antibiotics in your life. Okay. So can you name anything? Anyone?
Streptomycin.
Hmm?
Streptomycin.
Streptomycin, yes.
Azithromycin.
Azithromycin, yes. So any such mycin kind of thing, those are all antibiotics. Okay, anything else?
Amoxicillin.
Amoxicillin, right. So we'll see.
Penicillin notatum.
Huh? Penicillin, did you say penicillin?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, yes. So penicillin is also an antibiotic, right? So yes, so these antibiotics actually, these are very important. So I mean, now in this pandemic situation, we know how these small organisms can completely disrupt our life, right? So what many people don't understand is that virus is actually the simplest life form, okay? And it is actually easier to kill virus. But if this pandemic is caused by any bacteria, then we are all doomed. So in case of virus, you can make vaccines, you can try to contain this. The mortality rate is also not very high, right? So in India, it is 1.8%, worldwide it is 3%. But if it is bacteria, then you can be sure that this mortality rate will be more than 50%, right? So these are really dangerous pathogens. And it turns out that in the last 30, 40 years, we have not been able to discover any new antibiotic. Whatever antibiotics we have are old, and now there are reports that there are certain bacteria which do not respond to any of the available antibiotics. So those are called superbugs. Okay. Which means that if someone gets infection by the superbug, then there is no cure. Okay. So anyway, we will come to that in few minutes. But let's look at this process of translation and how you can actually attack this to kill this bacteria. So you know this is messenger RNA. So again, it is written in a language with 4 letters, AUGC. And this is something that it will look like, right? Now it turns out that if this is a bacterial messenger RNA, towards the 5' end, there will be a small sequence which will be called the ribosome binding site, or RBS. So the ribosome will recognize this RBS, it will bind it and then start making the protein. But in case of eukaryotic messenger RNA, that is our messenger RNA, this type of RBS are not necessary because the ribosome recognizes the 5' capping. Right? So that capping that is put, it recognizes that and then it starts from there. So anyway, the ribosome will bind here, that's the machinery. Then it will start sliding on this. This is called the start codon. So this is where it will start synthesizing the protein. And this is called the stop codon. This is where it will stop making the protein. Right. Now you will see that there is of course not one-to-one correspondence. So when you make DNA, when you make RNA from DNA, there is a straightforward one-to-one correspondence, right? Because there are 4 letters in case of DNA, 4 letters in case of RNA. So it's straightforward. But in case of RNA to protein, you have only 4 letters and then you are converting into a protein which has 20 letters. Okay, there are 20 types of amino acids. So you cannot just go for a direct one-to-one correspondence. So what nature has done is nature has used combination of 3 nucleotides to code for one amino acid. So these 3 nucleotides AUG, these code for one amino acid which is called methionine. Then this next 3 AAG, they code for another amino acid which is called lysine, so on and so forth. Right. So can you tell me how many such codons will be possible? So codons are nothing but combination of 3 nucleotide sequences. So how many different types of codons are possible?
64.
How do you get 64?
So 4C4.
4C4.
sorry. Means
4C4 is what?
Sir, 4 into 4 into 4, right?
Yeah, 4 to the power 3. So there are 4 possibilities in the first position. There are 4 possibilities in the second position, and there are 4 possibilities in the third position. Right. So 4 times 4 times 4, that's 64. If you have a codon of 2 nucleotides, how many you will get? 4 times 4, 16, right? So that actually falls short of 20. So you have to go for 3 codons. But then now you have much more than 20. So that is exactly what is seen. So nature uses this 3 codons, combination of 3 nucleotides, to code for each amino acid. Okay. But now since you have more than 20, what nature has done is it uses multiple codons to code for a single amino acid. So you will see, for example, this one, ALA, this is alanine. Okay. So these 4 codons code for, all of them code for alanine. These 4 codons code for threonine. Right. So on and so forth. There are some which have only one. So methionine is coded by only one codon. Tryptophan is coded by only one codon. But then there are others which are coded by 4 or sometimes 6. So this leucine, it has 6 codons dedicated to it. Okay. So you don't have to remember this table. All you have to understand is the concept, right? And it turns out that this table, it is called the genetic code. This table is universal. So bacteria uses that, viruses use this, we also use this. My pet dog also uses this. If there is a mouse coming into my house, that is, they are also using this. So this genetic code, this table is universal. Okay. All organisms on Earth use that. If there are aliens, they might have generated their own genetic codon, but at least all the organisms which are terrestrial, they all use this genetic code. So now that's good. So you are using this 3-letter codon to code for one amino acid. But how exactly do you do that? Right. So this is one language. This is a different language. This is your dictionary where you are getting the translation. So UUG means leucine. CCU means proline. Okay. And you see there is a start codon and a stop codon. So this is where the ribosome starts, which codes for methionine. It will not start here, it will not start here. It will always start with AUG. And this is where it stops. So it turns out that there are 3 stop codons. So it can be UAA, it can be UAG, it can be UGA. Any 3 of this, if they show up, this machinery will stop coding for the, will stop synthesizing this polypeptide chain. Okay. Now, We know the dictionary, but then how do you actually get this translation? Okay, there has to be some chemical basis, some chemical process for that, right? So that is actually done by using some sort of adapter molecule. So this is an adapter molecule. Okay, because you are going from one type of molecule or a combination of three nucleotides to a different type of molecule, which is an amino acid. So you have to somehow make this link, and that is done by this molecule, which is an adapter molecule. So initially it was called an adapter molecule. Now it is called tRNA. So T stands for translation because it is doing this translation. Okay. So this tRNA, you see towards this end, there are three nucleotides. So each of this tick that is poking out, these are nucleotides, bases. Okay. So these three bases will recognize these three and it will form the base pairing. So it has to be complementary. So if this is AUG, what will be the complementary sequence here? So for A, it will be
G. It will be
no,
GTC.
complementary of A is U.
So
AU form the base pairing, right? So here the sequence will be U, A, C. Right. So for every codon, there will be a unique transfer RNA where these three will be complementary to these three. And on the other hand, this one will carry the corresponding amino acid. So this three bases will be UAC, and on this end, it will be a methionine. For this one, this will be UUC here, and here it will carry a lysine. Okay, so since there are 20 amino acids, you will have at least 20 such transfer RNA. Okay, in theory, you should have 61 such transfer RNA because there are 61 codons. There are no transfer RNAs for the stop codon. Okay, so that is how you go from this language of 4 letters to this language of 20 letters. This genetic code was actually figured out by 3 research groups. Okay, and together they got the Nobel Prize in 1968. So this is Dr. Hargobind Khorana. Okay, so Khorana, Nirenberg, and Hawley. These 3 people together, they figured out which codon codes for which amino acid. Okay, so this work was done by Khorana in Harvard, and then later on he moved to Vancouver in UBC. Right, and of course they got the Nobel Prize for this work. So this is how you get this amino acid on the tRNA. Right. So you see this is the messenger RNA. If it is coding for UUU, there will be a transfer RNA, tRNA, which will have AAA as its anticodon. So this is the codon, this will be the anticodon. And it will carry a phenylalanine. So this UUU codes for phenylalanine. Right. So if I go back to the table, can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, sir.
Okay, but somehow my cursor is frozen. So, okay. So what I'm trying to show here is that there is an enzyme. So the name of the enzyme is written there, aminoacyl tRNA synthetase. Okay. So these enzymes are the ones which are responsible for putting the right amino acid on the correct tRNA. Okay. So the tRNA For some reason it is extremely slow. Okay. So this tRNA, that's the anticodon, and this enzyme, so enzymes are also protein, and enzymes are proteins which catalyze reactions. Okay, so enzymes are natural catalysts, and you will see that in our body there are thousands of enzymes which are responsible for carrying out catalyzing different reactions. So this particular enzyme, it is responsible for putting this amino acid, which is called a phenylalanine, onto this particular tRNA, which carries the anticodon for phenylalanine. Okay, so if you have 20 amino acids and 20 tRNA, you will have 20 such proteins. Okay, so now let's see how exactly ribosome works. So this is the messenger RNA. Now ribosome, if you, I forgot to point out in the previous slide. So ribosome has two subunits. Okay, one subunit is called the 30S. The other subunit is called the 50S. Now this S stands for a particular unit which is called the Swedberg unit. Right. So you don't have to worry too much about this Swedberg unit. If you just remember 30S and 50S, that should be enough. So 30S is the smaller subunit, 50S is the larger subunit. So this is the messenger RNA. This 30S subunit, it will come and bind the messenger RNA towards its 5' end, wherever the ribosome binding site is. Okay, and then it will try to find that start codon. Then this transfer RNA comes in, which is carrying the anticodon for the start codon. So this was AUG. So you see the anticodon is UAC. That's the anticodon for the start codon. And towards the other end, it is carrying this amino acid, which is methionine. So you can see this, right? Can you see this slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these are the first events. Okay, you will see that this is again a very fantastic self-assembly kind of system. And this is happening in your body every second, right? We are producing thousands of proteins every second. Messenger RNA, the 30S subunit binds it first, and then the tRNA corresponding to the start codon comes in. Now the 50S subunit will come and bind this whole thing together. Okay, so this particular image is little misleading. It seems like there is no connection between this and this, but it is not like that. This is completely wrapped around the messenger RNA. Okay, so this thing is huge molecule, and this is completely wrapped around the messenger RNA. So now your ribosome is complete. The 50S, the 30S, and the transfer RNA. And you will see that this has 3 unique sites, okay, which we have labeled as E, P, and A. So P site is where this first one is bound. Now the second transfer RNA will come and bind the second codon. So this was GGGCC, which is carrying a glycine, will come and bind here. So there are 2 tRNA which are connected to, which are bound to the ribosome. Now there will be a reaction between these two, so that this bond will be cleaved. The amino acid will now be connected to the glycine via the peptide bond. So the C terminus of this methionine will be connected to the N terminus of the glycine. So this will be the first amino acid, this will be the second amino acid, like so. Okay, so they are now connected by this peptide bond. Now you can see that this tRNA is free. Now this whole machinery will shift towards the right, so that this empty tRNA now occupies the E site, okay, which you can think it stands for empty or exit. The tRNA which is carrying this dipeptide is sitting at the P site. This will just go out. The next transfer RNA will come and bind here. Again, the reaction will happen. Now, these two will get transferred to this third tRNA, which will have the growing chain of the polypeptide. Again, the whole thing will move and the empty tRNA will out. So, the cycle keeps on going like this until this ribosome hits the stop codon. Okay. The moment it hits the stop codon, there are no tRNA which codes for that stop codon. So, the ribosome will actually fall apart. Okay. The peptide will be cleaved from the last tRNA and the ribosome. This whole machinery will disintegrate. Now you will have your protein. Okay. So, any question up to this point? Any doubts, any questions? Nothing? Okay. So, this is an overview. And again, you can see that this is a eukaryotic cell. So, you can tell whether a particular cell is eukaryotic or prokaryotic by the presence of the nucleus. Okay. So, in bacterial cell, which is a prokaryotic, everything is out in the open. So, this will be the outer one, that's the plasma membrane, and everything is in this area. Okay. But in case of eukaryotes, there are many specialized compartments. So, things are segregated in these different compartments. One such compartment is the nucleus, which holds the DNA. So, DNA replication and transcription, all of these happen inside this nucleus. So, inside the nucleus, your messenger RNA is created, right? So, initially there will be this pre-messenger RNA, then you will get the 5' cap, this intron processing will happen. So, the introns will go out and the exons will join. You will get the poly A tail. Now, this messenger RNA goes out into the cytoplasm. This is where the ribosomes will come and bind. So, you see these are the ribosomes, and they will start moving from the 5' end towards the 3' end, and in that process they will keep making this polypeptide chain. Once they hit the stop codon, this chain cleaves out and this whole machinery will fall apart, and again it will go and bind towards this 5' end and start doing the translation. Okay. So, these ribosomes, these are present in huge number and they keep on making these proteins in our body, because all the work that is done in any living system are done by these nanomachines, which are called proteins. Okay. So, we have now gone through this complete central dogma of molecular biology, right? So, on one end you have the DNA, which stores information. On the other hand, you have protein, which carries out all the function. Okay. So, now if I ask you to replicate DNA, you need DNA polymerase. To do the transcription, you need RNA polymerase. So, what type of polymers these are? These are nucleic acids or these are proteins? Do you know what is DNA polymerase? Is it a DNA, is it an RNA, is it a protein, or it is something else?
These are proteins, right?
These are all proteins. Okay. So, now tell me, you need a protein to make RNA from DNA. Okay. But then to make that protein, you need DNA, because the information of that protein will be encoded in the DNA. So, if we just go back in time, like billions of years back, when life form evolved for the first time, which molecule do you think came first, DNA or the protein? It's not possible that everything came together, right? Then we have to believe in intelligent design. If it is evolution, so evolution says that certain random events happened, and some of them led to this type of molecules. So one of these two has to come first, right? So which one came first, DNA or protein?
So probably DNA, because it is much more simpler than proteins.
Yes, but then DNA cannot do anything, right? So suppose you have DNA, you cannot make more DNA from that DNA. To do that, you need a protein, which is DNA polymerase. If you want to make RNA from the DNA, you need protein. And then finally, if you are making all these proteins from this, right? So unless and until you have protein, you cannot do anything else. But then again, if you don't have DNA, you cannot make protein, because proteins do not encode information. Information is encoded in DNA. So that's sort of this chicken and egg problem, right? So which came first? Chicken came first or egg came first? Without chicken, you will not get egg. And if there is no egg, the chicken will not come, right? So one solution that people have sort of agreed upon, again, these are all speculation, because unless and until we have a time machine and we can go back billions of years, we cannot confirm this, but the evidences prove sort of point towards RNA. That RNA, which you can see, it's the bridge between these two. RNA is most probably the one that evolved first, and it had this dual purpose. It was encoding information like DNA, and it was also catalyzing reactions like protein. Okay, but it was not good in both, because we know RNA is not very stable, so it would disintegrate very fast. And again, RNA, even though they can do catalysis reaction, they can catalyze reactions. They are not as good as proteins, right? So have you seen any example where RNA can catalyze a reaction? Can anyone tell if you have seen any example where RNA catalyzes a reaction?
So in splicing, like like the RNA, uh, uh, like it automatically cuts itself out the intron.
Right. So the self-splicing, right? So this is messenger RNA, right? And these are the introns. And this messenger RNA, it itself cuts it out. So this is very precise. So it's not any random process. Okay, it's cutting at very precise locations, and it is also catalytic because it is happening quite fast. So this is the first example that we have already seen, where RNA is actually catalyzing a chemical reaction. And of course, it has the same composition as DNA, so it definitely encodes information, right? So RNA turns out to be, or it's the is what we believe now, that most probably this is the molecule that evolved first. It was doing both, encoding information and also catalyzing reaction. And later on, more sophisticated molecules evolved, and then that work was solely taken over by DNA, where DNA is responsible for storing information, because DNA can last much longer, right? So we have seen that RNA is not very stable. So because of this, why RNA is not stable?
It is hydroxyl group.
Which hydroxyl group? There is a particular hydroxyl group, right? So it's the 2' OH. Hydroxyl group at the 2' position. So you can go back and check what I'm saying. So that hydroxyl group is absent in DNA. In DNA it is H. In case of RNA it is OH, right? And that OH can break the phosphodiester bond. Okay, so those slides are already there. You can just go and check. So that is what makes RNA much less stable. But DNA, first of all, it lacks that 2' OH. So chemically it is more stable. And secondly, DNA exists as a double strand. Okay, so double-stranded helix, which also makes these phosphate diester groups less accessible to water and other nucleophiles or electrophiles, right? So chemically it becomes much more stable. So it turns out that DNA can store information for thousands of years. So in our lab, we get DNA synthesized. Okay, it comes out as a dry powder. You can just put it in a tube and ship it. No need to put any ice or anything, right? It's just fine. And we can just keep it in my bench for 10 years. It will be fine. Okay, so DNA is actually a very robust molecule. Okay, on the other hand, protein, now you have 20 different amino acids, right? So the number of functional groups that you have is much higher. So which is why proteins can have a much bigger repertoire of functional groups which can carry out different catalytic reactions. Right? So it turns out that RNA is the one which most probably evolved first. And there are more evidences. So if we look at the ribosome, so this is the ribosome. Okay, so a bit more realistic picture. You see, this is the 30S subunit, and this is the 50S subunit. The tRNA is bound somewhere here. The polypeptide chain is sort of wiggling out from this small tunnel. Okay, and this is where the reaction happens, where one amino acid reacts with another amino acid to give you the peptide bond. And that region, if you focus on this region, okay, so this is an actual picture. So that's where this peptide chain is coming out. So if you look at this region, it is completely surrounded by RNA. So it turns out that ribosome is not just protein. It is a mixture of several proteins and RNA. So that particular RNA is called ribosomal RNA or rRNA. Okay. So in this lecture, we have talked about three types of RNA: messenger RNA or mRNA, transfer RNA or tRNA, and ribosomal RNA or rRNA. The entity which catalyzes this reaction, that is joining two amino acids and forming the peptide bond or amide bond, that entity is actually the ribosomal RNA. So this is the second example where RNA acts as an enzyme. Okay, so because of all these reasons, people believe that it is RNA which evolved first, and then all other molecules came into being. So again, this is just a summary of what we have seen so far. In case of bacteria, everything happens out in the open. This is DNA, messenger RNA is getting created, and while it is getting synthesized, ribosome comes and binds and starts making proteins. But in case of eukaryotes, that is us, things are compartmentalized. Okay, messenger RNA is synthesized first, it gets processed, and then gets transported out into the cytoplasm, and then here the proteins are getting synthesized. So these things people have. So now we have some really powerful experimental techniques. So one such technique is called cryo-EM. So EM stands for electron microscope. Okay, so it's a very powerful microscope where you are bombarding electrons towards your biological samples and getting images like this. Right. So if you see this image, you can sort of see a thin line that goes like this. Okay, so that thin line is actually the DNA. Okay, and on that DNA, RNA polymerases are sort of sliding so that they are synthesizing this messenger RNA. Okay, so these are the messenger RNA, and on that messenger RNA, these black spheres that you see, those are the ribosomes. They are bound to this messenger RNA and they are synthesizing the proteins. You are not going to see the protein, those are too small for electron microscope to actually pick up. So the resolution is not that low. So, but we do see the ribosomes quite nicely. Okay, so what you actually see here is sort of shown pictorially here. So that's the DNA, the messenger RNA is getting synthesized by the RNA polymerases, and on that the ribosomes are bound, which are making the protein or the polypeptide chain. Okay, so another question. This is an actual biological sample. So can you tell me whether this sample has been prepared using a bacterial cell or a eukaryotic cell?
A bacterial cell, because there is no post-processing.
Yes, because the moment the RNA is getting synthesized, the ribosomes are bound to them, right? So this has to be a bacterial cell. Okay. So, and as I told you that since there are quite a few differences between the ribosome that is present in bacteria versus us, there are many antibiotics which have been developed to attack the bacterial ribosome specifically. Okay, so we are seeing only 4 examples here. There are much more. Tetracycline. This is something that binds to this A site. So remember that tRNA comes and binds here. So the first one is bound here. The second one binds here. Now tetracycline will go and sit here, and it will stop this second tRNA to come and bind, which means that the protein synthesis will be stopped, right? So you have basically thrown a wrench inside this big machine. Okay. Similarly, there is chloramphenicol, which actually stops this reaction, right? Streptomycin binds to this 30S site, erythromycin binds to this 50S site. So together they bind at different positions and completely block the synthesis of protein. And if you block synthesis of protein, the bacteria will eventually die because it cannot do anything without protein. Right. And ribosome is a very important target because ribosomes is one of those few molecules where mutations are very rare. Okay, so you will not get many mutations or changes in the ribosome that will prevent these molecules to work, right? So those mutations or those changes are very rare, which makes ribosome a very attractive target. Okay, like for example, someone said penicillin. So penicillin was discovered during the World War, right? And it was a great discovery, but then penicillin, all the bacteria that were actually dying of penicillin, they got mutations and most probably they died out, some new bacteria evolved, and penicillin became useless in 20 years. So lifetime of penicillin was 20 years. So then people actually modified penicillin. So there are modified penicillins. Then we also add other molecules together with penicillin to make it work, right? But then that is one big problem, that these bacteria, they become resistant to these different antibiotics, right? So that is one reason why doctors say that you should not use antibiotic. Just you're feeling little sick, you take antibiotic. Okay, so don't do that, because the more antibiotics you take, the more antibiotics we are putting in our body, and also we are putting inside in our neighborhood, and we are giving this bacteria more chance to mutate and get resistant to them. Okay, so I don't know if any one of you have heard that that you should not take antibiotic frequently. Unless and until a doctor prescribes you, you should not take antibiotics. And when you take antibiotics, you should complete the course so that you don't let those bacteria survive, right? Okay, any questions up to this point? So now we'll get into proteins. Okay. So again, this is something that I have been discussing, and you have heard it in the last few lectures. So DNA is the storage medium, RNA is the transmission medium, and finally you use these information to create proteins or peptides. And we are going from 4-letter language to a 20-letter language. So this is how a protein would look like. It's a linear polymer. Each of these monomers are amino acids, and this is the typical structure of the amino acid. The first one will have a free NH2 group, the last one will have a free COH group. So this will be the N terminus or amino terminus, and this will be the C terminus or the carboxylic terminus. Now, when we looked at DNA has a double helix structure, right? So when Watson and Crick, they discovered the structure of DNA, they actually discovered the structure of all DNA molecules, right? It was a great discovery. But then if you think of DNA structure, it's quite boring because all DNA look more or less the same. But when it comes to proteins, it turns out that every protein has a different architecture, a different structure, right? So proteins, they come in various shapes and sizes. This is one example. So this protein is called hemoglobin, right? So this is found in our red blood cell. Any idea what is the function of this protein?
To carry oxygen.
It is the one that carries oxygen from your lungs to different parts of your body. Okay, so this is again a very important molecule. I will come to this hemoglobin structure. I'll talk about this in more details. But just to point out, what you see here is 4 different colors, right? So these are actually 4 different polypeptide chains. So one polypeptide chain is a one single polymer which folds into this particular shape. Okay, so all of them have exactly the same shape, and now they are all sticking together, right? And each of them have this disc shaped thing. So this is called the heme group, and it carries a iron. So that red sphere in the center that you see, that is iron. This iron is the one which will bind the oxygen. Okay, it binds oxygen very tightly in the lungs, and then when it goes to your muscle, that tightness of binding becomes weak, and it will release the oxygen there. Okay, so it is a very good oxygen transporter, and then it will pick up carbon dioxide from those muscle cells or different parts of your body and bring it back to the lungs. So it's a fantastic carrier molecule. And these red blood cells, they are packed with these proteins. So these are the ones which give this red color to these red blood cells, and these cells give the red color to your blood. Okay, so can you imagine what is the so in our body, if you think of us and if you think of all the different types of cells that we have, so you have cells for your muscle cells, you have cells for your skin, you have different cells for your heart muscle, liver, lungs, brain cells, right? So every organ has a different cell. So roughly we have 200 different types of cells in our body. So let's say if we have total number of cells in our body is 100%, can you guess what will be the percentage of red blood cells among all the cells? So there are 200 types of cells, right? So what will be the percentage of red blood cells in our body? Of course, none of you will know. I mean, if you Google it, you will find it, right? But I just wanted you to give some random numbers. Anyone thinks it should be more than 10%? Okay. So it turns out that these red blood cells, they constitute 84% of all the cells, right? So these are actually the most abundant cells. And our body, every minute, we are making 10 crores of such red blood cells, right? So that's one type of protein that is present in these cells. Then there are these different types of proteins which are called ion channels. So these are the ones which are responsible for transferring different ions. Okay. So any idea where this type of proteins are present?
Cell membrane.
Cell membrane, yes. And these actually play a very important role, these sodium and potassium ion channels. So these are present in our neurons, okay, nerve cells, right? And these are the ones which are responsible for carrying the signal to different parts of the body. So when I pinch my hand, my brain feels it. That's because the signal is transferred through a neuron from that particular part of the body to my brain. Okay. If I cut that neuron, then I will not feel that pinch. Okay. And that is done, so that signal is transmitted by this type of proteins. Then of course there are proteins like this. So these are this particular protein is called microtubule. So it's actually a polymer of proteins, and this is something that is responsible for holding the structure of a cell. So if you think of a building, you have these beams which hold the structure of that building. These microtubules are like that. So they run across a cell and they hold the shape of that particular cell. But that is not only what they do, they can actually grow and shrink, which means that they can change their length, right? And that is something that is very important for a particular cell to move. So they actually help cells to move from one place to another place. And within the cell, they help to carry things from one part of the cell to other part of the cell. So what you see down here, that is the microtubule. So this also acts like a railroad. And this is another protein which is called a kinesin. There are two such proteins. One is kinesin, the other one is dynein. And they carry huge cargo like this from one end of the cell to the other end of the cell. So kinesin, they move in one direction, and dynein, they move in the other direction. So one train is Delhi to Howrah, the other one is Howrah to Delhi, right? So up train and down train. So I've already talked about these. Okay. So these are different types of proteins, right? So again, chemically, if you think, it's made up of amino acids. There are 20 types of amino acids, and these amino acids are linked via peptide bond. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus a little bit on this peptide bond. Okay. So if you think about the peptide bond, that's the peptide bond. So this is nitrogen and this is the carbonyl carbon. You can have this resonance structure where this lone pair of electrons from the nitrogen can go here and this goes here. So you have this positive charge here and negative charge on the oxygen. So when you have this resonating structure, what is the hybridization of this carbon and this nitrogen?
Fried chicken, cornbread, onion rings, and orange freeze if memory serves. Very Rain Man of you. Been doing this a long time. Thought I'd be doing it until the day I die. This is unacceptable. Just everything. Pop, have you officially sold the diner? The contract's being drawn up.
Okay. What is the hybridization of this carbon and this nitrogen? This is basic chemistry. No one knows.
sp2.
So which one is sp2? Carbon or the nitrogen or both?
Both.
In the second one, both are sp2.
Both are sp2, right? What is the geometry of sp2?
Trigonal planar.
Triangular planar.
Trigonal planar. It's planar.
Trigonal planar.
I don't know. Trigonal is sort of immaterial. It's planar, right? Yeah, in this case, of course, they are forming a triangle, but yeah. So these are planar. So this, and this, they are on the same plane. And if you think of this, these four are on the same plane. So if it turns out that all the 6 atoms, so this one is a C alpha atom, and this one is another C alpha, like here. So this C alpha, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, proton, and C alpha, all these 6 are on the same plane. So that is what I am showing here. But when you have this form, because this is resonance, right? So this acts like a single bond. So you can actually have a rotation about this bond. And it will look like this. So what I have done is I have flipped these two. The C alpha has gone down, the H has gone up. So I have rotated about this CN bond, right? And again, you can have resonance where all these 6 are planar. So in this case, the 2 C alpha groups are on the same side of this peptide bond. And in this case, the 2 C alpha groups are on the opposite side of this peptide bond. Okay. This has a particular name. When they are on the opposite side, this is called trans. When they are on the same side, this is called cis. So cis and trans peptide bonds. So there are only 2 types of peptide bonds. One is trans and the other one is cis. If we look at this main chain, what we will find is that these 3 bonds keep on repeating throughout the main chain of the amino acid. Okay, so this is one amino acid. You see, this is the C alpha amine group, carbonyl group, and that's the side chain. Then this forms a peptide bond with another amine group, C alpha, carbonyl group, another peptide bond, so on and so forth. So you have this peptide bond, then this nitrogen to C alpha to carbonyl carbon. Then again another peptide bond, nitrogen to C alpha to carbonyl. So these 3 keep on repeating, right? What we have seen so far is that this peptide bond, this has a partial double bond character because of this particular resonance structure. So it has a partial double bond character, which means that rotation about this peptide bond is restricted. So either you get this trans form or this cis form. But if you think of these bonds, the NC or the C alpha carbonyl, there is no such restriction about this. So you can actually have free rotation about these peptide bonds. Right. So these 3 types of bonds and the rotation about these 3 types of bonds are given a particular name. So this rotation, the angle that defines this rotation is called the omega. The angle that defines this rotation is called the phi, and the angle that defines this rotation will be psi. Again, you see, this is peptide, so this will be another omega, phi, psi, omega, phi, psi, so on and so forth. So for each amino acid, you will have 3 such angles, omega, phi, and psi. Now, omega can take only 2 values because of the partial double bond character, and those 2 values are actually defined here. So for cis, where the 2 C alpha groups are on the same side of the peptide bond, omega is defined as 0, and for trans, where the two C alphas are on the opposite side of the peptide bond. So you see one is this, the other one is on this side, not on this side. So this is trans, right? So you can tell from this that this is not the standard angle that we have studied in our geometry, right, in high school geometry. So in high school geometry, the geometry that we have studied is a planar geometry. But in this case, this is three-dimensional geometry or solid geometry, right? Here the angle is not defined by 3 points and 2 straight lines. So this is the angle that we normally think about. In this case, the angle is defined by 4 points and 3 lines. In this case, 3 bonds. And the rotation is about the central one. Okay, so this is a solid angle. The way you visualize such a angle, so the technical term that we use is called torsion angle, right? So you have done engineering drawing, so you should be able to see this. So this is one view that we are seeing, and if you see it from this left hand side, it would look like this, where the first 2 atoms are shown 1 and 2, and the next 2, 3 and 4 will be right behind 1 and 2, right? So 3 is right behind 2 and 4 will be right behind 1. So I have shown 4 and 2, 4 and 3 as dotted circles. So this particular view is defined as the 0-degree angle. So you can tell that these two, 1 and 4, are on the same side of this central bond. So that's the cis, and we define cis as 0-degree. In this particular view, if we take the 4th atom, which is the one in the back, and if we rotate it, so we are rotating about this bond, 2,3 bond. So if we rotate it in the right hand side, so clockwise, if I trace out an angle, this angle is 45 degree. In this view, the rotation will, so all of these are on the plane of your screen, right? If I do this rotation, then this 4th atom will actually come out towards you. So it will come out towards you from the plane of the screen. And normally we show that as a solid wedge. So this is coming out towards you. That's 45 degree. You can do the reverse. So you can rotate this counterclockwise, and the angle that this traces out is minus 45 degree. So in this case, this atom 4 will go towards the back of the plane. So it will go away from you. Okay. And we show that by this dotted wedge. So small wedge means small triangle, right? And this not solid like this, but hatched like this. Okay, so that is minus 45 degree. So how will this look? Minus 135 degree. In which direction will it go? So first tell me in this figure. Will it go towards the right or the left? The 4th atom, will it be towards the right? So I'm talking about this figure. The 4th atom, will it be towards this side or towards this side? Towards right or towards left? Clockwise or counterclockwise?
Clockwise.
Minus 135. Why clockwise? You see, minus 45, I have gone counterclockwise, right? I'm
We
going
have to
in
go
this direction.
counterclockwise another 90 degrees.
Huh?
We have to go counterclockwise another 90 degrees.
Another 90 degree from this.
Yes, sir.
So that will be below somewhere here, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So it will be below somewhere here. So that is what your minus 135 looks like. What about this one? it will be up or down, or it will be, and the second question is whether it will be like this or whether it will be a solid wedge. First tell me whether it will be up or down. In this direction or in this direction?
Sir, down.
It will be down. Then whether it will be like this or solid?
Sir, downward hatch.
Downward hatch, because it will be towards the back of the plane. Right. So this is what you will get for minus 135 degree. Okay. So this is something that is very important, and it was actually figured out by someone in our country only. Right. So this is the work of G.N. Ramachandran and his student, so his PhD student, Shashi Shekharan. So they were in IIC Bangalore, and what they did was they realized that proteins, so they have to fold. And the folding happens by rotation about these bonds. So you are not going to get rotation about this bond, so they didn't care about this, but you will get rotation about these bonds. Okay. Now, the first question that they asked was, are all angles possible? So you can imagine there is 180 degree for phi, 0 to plus 180 degree and 0 to minus 180 degree. So total 360 degree rotation for phi and total 360 degree rotation for psi. To do that, they actually made models. Okay. They made models by hand. You cannot buy any of these things. So they actually made those to the scale, and they rotated them and tried to see what kind of angles they are getting. Right. Now, to summarize their result, they actually did that very elegantly. They came up with this particular plot called the Ramachandran plot. Okay. So on this x-axis, you are plotting the phi angles. So this goes to 0 to plus 180 degree, that's the clockwise rotation, and 0 to minus 180 degree, that's the anti-clockwise rotation. Similarly, psi, 0 to plus 180 and 0 to minus 180. Okay. And if you think about it, minus 180 is this, plus 180 is this. So minus 180 and plus 180 are exactly the same thing. Okay. So that completes the full rotation about phi and psi. Right. So in this map or in this plot, you actually get all possible rotations phi and psi for a particular amino acid. So they took different pairs of amino acids. There are 20 amino acids. So if you take different pairs, how many pairs will you get? How many dipeptides will you get?
20 square.
20 square. So that is 400. Yeah. So they actually took such numbers and then they rotated, and then they saw that not all angles are possible. Okay. So that is sort of shown in this GIF image. So this is one amino acid. This is another amino acid. Okay. So the psi angle is kept constant. Okay. So that's the peptide plane. The phi angle is being rotated. So you see at this 0, 0, the two atoms are colliding. So then you can then based on all these other side chains, it turns out that not all angles are possible. So there is only some angles which can be occupied in this region. Some angles can be occupied in this region, a small part in this region, and almost nothing in this quadrant. Okay. And then also it turned out that the amino acids which would occupy this part of the Ramachandran plot, they will have a specific structure. So this spiral kind of structure. Okay. So all the amino acids, they form a spiral kind of structure. So their phi and psi torsion angles will be in this region. And then other amino acids which form this extended structure, and then they can form hydrogen bonds between them. So these are called the beta strands. They occupy this particular region. And then there is a small set of amino acids which will form the another spiral, but it spirals on the opposite direction. So this is right-handed, that will be left-handed. So that's a left-handed helix. Right. So all of this they were able to predict based on these small models that they built by hand, and then they calculated all the angles. Right. Let me see. Thought I had a slide here. Okay, maybe that slide is not here. That's fine. So it turns out that this prediction that Ramachandran and his student they made, it turned out to be quite true. That this Ramachandran plot, so this was done in early 1960s. Right? So only a few protein structures were solved at that point of time. Now we have solved almost 2 lakh protein structures, right? So if you make Ramachandran plots of all those protein structures, you will get a plot very similar to this. So Ramachandran plot is something that is used by, that is a gold standard. So whenever you solve any protein structure by any method, you have to supply this Ramachandran plot. Then only people will believe that, okay, what you have done is believable. Okay. So in my lab, we also solve protein structures using NMR spectroscopy. And whenever we submit those data, we also create the Ramachandran plot and submit that so that people can review those structures and they can actually see that, yes, this structure is actually realistic structure, right? So Ramachandran plot has become the gold standard of judging a protein structure. Okay. So I will just go through 2 or 3 more slides and then I will stop for today, and then I can take it up in the next lecture. So I have been talking about protein folding, protein architecture and things like that, right? So protein is something, when it is synthesized, it will be a linear chain like this, right? But then it is not how it remains, because each of these phi and psi torsion angles, you can have rotations about this. So that is exactly what happens, that all of this get twists and turn so that this extended structure collapse into itself. Okay, and finally form some ball-like structure like this. Okay, so this will be a collapsed structure, which we call the final energy minimized structure of a protein. So these rotations about these torsion angles, this is something that is very similar to a robotic arm. I don't know if you have seen a robotic arm, right? So robotic arms, these are used in different assembly lines. So if car manufacturing is happening, you will see that there is a robotic arm which has multiple joints and rotations can happen about those joints, right? So robotic arms are used to do various work. So this protein folding is very similar to that, right? And I'll talk about protein folding problem. So it turns out that this robotic arm problem you can solve using artificial intelligence. Of course, you can use different methods. Now people are using artificial intelligence. And protein folding is also something where you can use that kind of knowledge to solve the protein folding problem. Right? So what is the protein folding problem? Now, initially proteins, when it is synthesized, it is like this long string. Okay. But it then starts folding. So what you see here is that it has formed this alpha helix, these pink ones, the spiral structures, these are the alpha helices. And then this yellow one, that's the beta strand. Okay. So these beta strands, they are sort of forming and falling apart. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to form the correct hydrogen bonding pattern. Once the correct hydrogen bonding pattern is formed, then the structure becomes stable. Okay. So again, it's actually in a loop. So you see that it starts as a extended structure and then it's trying to find the correct interactions between different atoms. And while it's doing that, what we are seeing is that the structure is becoming more and more compact. Okay, so all of that is happening via this rotations about these different bonds. So the phi and psi rotation. So every amino acid, its phi and psi rotation is happening. The alpha helices have sort of formed first, and then finally the beta strand forms, and you get the folded structure. If you do a little bit of calculation, that suppose I have a protein, a small protein with 100 residues, right? So I told you that the average size of protein in our body is 500 residues. And we have proteins which are tens of thousands of residues long. Okay, so this is a very modest number that we have taken. So if you consider 100 residues, or let's say 101 residues, then for every residue you will get phi and psi torsion angles, right? And if you think of Ramachandran plot, there are all sorts of phi and psi torsion angles possible. Now if we simplify the calculation by assuming that for each amino acid there is only 3 sets, 1, 2, 3, only 3 combinations of phi and psi torsion angle possible, then for the first amino acid there will be 3 torsion angles. For the second amino acid there will be another 3 set of torsion angles. For the third amino acid there will be another set of 3 torsion angles, so on and so forth, right? So if you have such, let's say 101 residues, then the total such combinations of different torsion angles will be 3 for the first one, 3 for the second one, 3 for the third one. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So you do that 100 times, right? So 3 to the power 100. That's the total number of different torsion angles which are possible. Now each of such combination of torsion angle will be one fold or one conformation. So 3 to the power 100 different conformations are possible. So what is 3 to the power 100? That is 5 times 10 to the power 47. Okay, that's actually a huge number, because if you assume that this type of rotation is happening very fast, and if each of the rotation takes only 0.1 picosecond, so 10 to the minus 13 second is 0.1 picosecond. Okay, so if one conformation converts into another conformation in this 0.1 picosecond, then to sample these many conformations, so if you have to go through all the possible conformations, the total time taken will be this multiplied by this, which is 10 to the power 34 seconds, which is 10 to the power 27 years, which is longer than the age of the universe, right? So what we have done is actually a very simple calculation. We have taken a very small number of amino acids and a very small number of conformations. The number of amino acids are actually much larger, and the number of conformations are also much larger. So you can imagine that if a protein has to go through all possible conformations, it will never fold. But in our body, we are synthesizing proteins every second, and they take a millisecond to fold. Okay, so they are folding very fast. And this final structure of a protein is very important, because it is the final structure of the protein which is responsible for its action. So whatever work it is doing, that depends on the properly, correctly folded structure of a protein. Means that clearly proteins are not going through all the conformations. Otherwise, it would have taken a huge amount of time. Actually, they are going through a very small subset of conformations, right? So that is the Leventhal's paradox, and that is also the protein folding problem. That how do proteins go to the correct conformation without sampling a significant amount of conformations? Okay, so they are not sampling these many conformations. They are not even sampling 1%. They are not even sampling 0.01%. They are sampling a very, very, very small amount of conformations, and they are getting to the correct answer. Okay. So that is broadly defined as the protein folding problem, and it is a long-standing problem. Okay. So I will end this class by posing the important questions that we have in this particular field. The first one is, how do proteins fold, and how do proteins achieve their final folded structure, right? So from this long stretched out string, how they get into this fold like we saw the hemoglobin, where it has a precise structure so that it can bind oxygen very precisely, how does it go to that structure without sampling all the possible conformations? So that's basically the second part of the same question. How do the proteins fold so fast? I mean, if it has to sample all the conformations, it will take years, billions of years, right? But they fold in milliseconds. So it means that they are not sampling all the conformations. So how do they do that? The second question is that, or the third question is that, can we predict protein structures without actually solving them? So if I have the sequence of a protein, meaning that what are the amino acids which are connected one after another. So if I have a 100 amino acid protein, if I know the sequence of all the amino acids which are connected, can I predict the structure of that protein without experimentally solving it? Because experimentally solving protein structures can take a long time. So in my lab, we solve protein structures by NMR spectroscopy, and it takes almost a year to get the protein structures. Right? Can we design artificial proteins with unique functions? So suppose I want to create a protein or an enzyme that will eat up plastic so that we can get rid of this pollution problem. Can I design a protein that will do that? Can I design an enzyme that will make ethanol from different waste products? Okay, so you have all these organic waste products that are generated every day. Can I add an enzyme to that which will convert that into ethanol? Right. So these are different problems, and can we design artificial proteins or artificial enzymes which can solve some of these problems? Okay, so these are the major questions in this field, and in the next class I will talk about these and what is the current status of this, where we stand as of today. Okay, so if you have any questions, you are most welcome to ask. Otherwise, you are most welcome to leave. We are done with today's lecture.